Once again, welcome everyone. Excited to get into our content today. We'll be chatting more today about how studios can find more success while increasing their influence in their communities. So yes, we will be talking about how to make your studio more profitable. Frankly, how to make that studio more profitable with less of your own input, frankly, with fewer students. Then we will be talking about how to acquire and retain more students as well. And we'll be talking a little bit about what it means to be successful outside of just more profit in your studio. A big piece of that for us is making sure that studios can have more influence in their communities. That's an important piece of that success. I'm going to be going through a lot of content very, very quickly today. It's not a bad idea if you haven't already to grab a pen and a paper or something that you can take notes with, because I will be moving through this content very, very quickly. We're going to be talking about how you can see more success in your studio and how you can do it without discounting classes, without offering free trials, without posting on social media like a Kardashian, unless that's your thing and that's what you want to do. For those of you that already know me, know that that's absolutely not my thing. Or by spending 60 hours a week behind the desk. I spend about 3 to 4 hours on average per week running all of my studio locations. I currently have 3 studio locations and taking on more risk than necessary as we grow. We want to make sure that you're able to see more success in your studio without taking on more risk than is necessary. There's nothing to buy on this webinar. You can put your credit card away, but we do have a really cool offer for those of you at the end that are interested in maybe getting some additional help from us. We'll talk about that as we get to the end of the presentation today. A couple of case studies I wanted to just share with you really quickly. These are from just the last week or so that I've been chatting with clients in our current program. Brooke launched one event that we teach. She did $12,000. That's in cash collected in one day. Sarah, just talked with her a couple days ago. She changed the way, all she did was she changed the way that she talks to people about her enrollment and made $4,000 immediately off the next 2 enrollments. All she did was change the way that she talks to people, okay? I personally, just in my own studios, I did $17,000 in cash collected at my last open house. Open house for us is 1 day long. It lasts 4 hours total. That's not $17,000 in like additional future revenue or something like that. That's $17,000 just in cash collected that day with students enrolling into long-term programs. 12-month programs is what this open house was for. And so there's a lot more cash coming in over the next, of course, 12 months, but $17,000 in cash collected off of new students in just those 4 hours at that one event. LaShonda just recently hit her first $100,000 month after completing our program, after being in a position where it was a little bit of a struggle bus while she was making it through the summers and that kind of stuff. So a lot of potential here. And I think one mistake that a lot of studios are making is that they're just simply not thinking big enough about what's possible for their studios. These are very isolated incidents. These are just incidents that I've talked to people in particular about in the last couple of weeks. And so it's by no means the high end of what's possible. It's by no means the high end of what's even possible for you. This is normal day-to-day stuff with people that are implementing the systems that we teach and that we'll be showing you some of today. Okay, it's not just me. It's not just these couple of folks. We literally have hundreds of studios implementing these things all over the place, teaching all kinds of different things in different kind of economies, different types of cities, some in highly populated areas, some in more rural areas. And while the implementation may be a little bit different, the principles are applying very successfully in many, many different locations. Okay. Now, I do not want to waste your time. This is absolutely not for you if you're happy where you're at. So if you're already happy with what your studio is doing, this may not be a great fit for you. We are going to be showing how we do things significantly differently than most studios in the industry do. And if you're kind of just good where you're at right now, it's probably not worth it to you to go through some of what we're going to be showing on this webinar today. If you aren't getting some word of mouth referrals already, this is probably not going to be a good fit for you. The reason for that is just simply because that's a pretty clear indication that people think that what you have is pretty awesome. Even if you're not getting enough of those referrals, that's fine. If you are getting a few referrals already, word of mouth referrals, this content will probably be more valid to you. If more students isn't a primary goal for your program, now, if you've followed us and the things that we teach for any amount of time, you know that a big piece of our principle is that we're trying to do more with less, all right? And I would gamble that our studios are the most profitable studios per square foot of any studio anywhere. There's a good chance of that. But if you're not also trying to at least grow your program a little bit and add some new students, all of these techniques work better if we can get some new guys and some fresh blood in the door, okay? Of course, if you're capable of doing more with less, of charging premium tuition rates, large down payments, longer term commitments, all those things, if you're willing to bring in additional students and additional enrollments, it's going to be more relevant for you if that's the case, okay? So if you don't have any room for new students in your studio, you can still get some value out of this, but it's going to be more valuable if you're able to put more students in your programs. If you're not willing to do things differently than most other studios, we are not interested in being the same as the masses. We're not interested in aspiring to mediocrity. That's not what I'm interested in doing. That's not what I'm interested in helping other studios to do. We're interested in helping to push the mean to the right. In other words, we're trying to make our studios significantly more successful than the average studio, as opposed to helping people figure out what everybody else is doing and trying to follow the masses. So we are doing things significantly differently than other studios, and if that's going to make you uncomfortable, we may be wasting your time here, okay? Another thing is if you're not interested in increasing the profitability of your program, I totally get it. Like I said in that first statement, if you're happy where you're at, totally fine. It's not offensive at all. It's just we don't want to waste your time. This is a big piece of what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, this is probably for you if you have a great program and you can just kind of tell there's something missing. Maybe you're at a plateau. Maybe you're paying yourself $4,000 or $5,000 a month, making a few bucks off your studio, but you feel like hey man, I could be doing significantly more. I have this awesome program. What is missing? Why am I not able to kind of launch this to the next level? Maybe if you're willing to invest what it takes to get a big return. And I don't just mean money. You just have to invest money in this, but there's going to be some time investment. Quite frankly, there's going to be a little bit of stepping outside your comfort zone because, like I mentioned a second ago, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently, and sometimes there's some fear and some bravery is required in the application of that. Okay, if you believe that the arts provide a huge value to the communities, and that those arts programs should have more influence, this is a huge one for me. I think it's important that arts programs, specifically instructional studios, should have more influence in their communities. I like to travel, and quite frankly, I like to go to places that have influential arts communities more than places that don't have those things, right? The places that have those things are better places to live. The quality of life in those places is just significantly better. And so we want to help studios to be a major participant in that as well. If you're willing to put in some work and step outside your comfort zone, this is a recurring theme. Look, all progress comes outside of our comfort zones. Without any sort of tension at all, we just stay in stasis and equilibrium. We need to be able to step outside our comfort zone a little bit in order to see massive progress, and that's kind of what we're looking for. That massive progress requires some massive implementation. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about why it's harder to attract profitable students today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. If we can understand some of that dynamic, helps us to make the right steps going forward in the next thing. We're going to talk about how we're able at our own studios to attract new students consistently, even in a relatively conservative community. Okay, now I don't live in a place, I live in a place with an awesome arts community, and I'm a big piece of that in my community. But like nobody thinks about the places where I live, the cities where my studios are, and says, oh yeah, that's where the arts have more influence. I don't live in a magic city. In other words, there's not something magic about the location that I live, or I'm like something about me or my personal circumstance that makes this work, right? If I can do this, quite frankly, in my circumstance, you can do it in yours as well. We'll talk a little bit today also about exactly what parts of your business to automate so you're not stuck at the front desk, but it's important to understand that automating everything at your studio is a huge mistake. And I think a lot of your competitors are probably, whether or not they know that, even subconsciously, they're trying to sort of run their business that way. We want to make sure that we don't automate our studios to the point where we are completely removing the human element. We'll talk a little about that, how to walk that balance, because it is a little bit of a narrow line that we want to make sure that we're balanced on top of, so that you're not stuck at the front desk. Like I said, I still am participating in my studios, but it's to the degree of like 3-4 hours a week on average, something like that. If I need to take a significant amount of time off for one reason or another, I'm capable of doing that, and we think that studio owners should be in that position. We'll talk also a little bit, just very briefly, about how we leverage digital advertising without a huge social following. I don't have a huge social following. Some of you that are watching this training right now, this may be the first of my trainings that you've ever seen. Welcome if that's the case. But I am not in any of my businesses setting them up in a way that requires me to be posting consistently on social media. Once again, if you want to be doing that, I don't have any problem with that, but it's not a necessary piece, and we're going to show you why that's the case if you set things up the right way. Okay. We'll also talk about how we deal with issues in the economy or COVID or whatever else is going on. There is always something. There is no real ideal time to implement, and so now, if I guess 20 years ago is the ideal time to implement, but outside that being the case, today's, if you didn't plant a tree 10 years ago, the second best time is right now. And so implementing right now is just as good as any time, and we can weather issues no matter what the economy brings. If there's some kind of crazy global pandemic, or even just personal family issues or personal health issues and those kind of things, of course I've experienced those in my own life. They do get in the way, but if we set up our business the right way, they are much less disruptive than most businesses experience them. Let me ask you a couple questions here. Does this sound familiar? Did you start your business full of hope and excited to share your love of your art with your students? But then you find yourself every once in a while asking yourself, hey, what happened? Are you putting in too many hours per week? You're missing out on family functions. You're missing out on family dinners. You're missing out on those things that you wish you could participate in, and you're watching kind of your social life wither, or maybe your social life is getting tangled up a little bit more with the studio life than you wish that it was. Do you have a spouse that resents your expensive hobby? Is this kind of the way that they see it? They see this as the thing that hey, this is the thing that mom does with her spare time, and it's just not really sort of this legitimate business. It's just kind of an expensive hobby. I hope they don't feel that way, but I know that there's some that have expressed to me that they do feel that way. Things look okay on the outside, but you'd be embarrassed to let anyone take a look at your books. Man, I totally get this one. Until I got to the point where I was willing to just be much more transparent with my numbers. Those of you that know me already know that I'm very transparent with what we're doing at our studios, the things that we experiment with. I treat my own studios as laboratories, and we test new things, and when those things fail, we let everybody know, right, what it was that happened. And so I'm not at all embarrassed to share those numbers, and of course proud of many of those numbers today. But if that's the way that you're kind of feeling about your business, man, we want to change that. We want to make sure that it's something that you can kind of let your flag fly and hold that standard up high for other people to be inspired by. If you're afraid of losing the passion that you started with, I hear this all the time. Man, I'm getting burned out. I'm just not sure how much longer I can do this. This isn't what I was trying to start. Or in other words, are you getting out of your business everything that you tried to avoid by opening it in the first place? Super quick, just for those of you who haven't been on any of our trainings in the past, I've been running successful studios myself since the late 1990s. In 2008, we had a lot of systems already in place that helped us to navigate the economic downturn, and we learned a heck of a lot during that time. We were able to successfully grow our studios through that. And then when COVID hit and it shut down, of course, all of our programs like it did everybody else, we were just able to navigate that very, very well. We did not lose a lot of students. We grew 100% of our studios and 100% of all of our programs through that time. As a matter of fact, during the shutdown periods, when we were physically shut down, we were able to continue to enroll in new students and raised our tuition rates 2 different times throughout that. Okay, and it's because of these things that we had figured out pre-2008, believe it or not, that had just kind of been in place and we continued to implement. I personally run dance studios. I technically have 3 dance studio locations right now. I have an aerial silks program for those of you that are familiar with that, and I teach this crazy Brazilian capoeira thing as well. That's where kind of my roots are originally, and I've been running those programs for a long time as well. Still have all of those programs operating and successful today. Speaking of the word successful, as we were doing a little bit of research and trying to decide what we were going to teach in our kind of next level training here, we interviewed a number of studio owners and asked them what being more successful meant to them. And I thought it was pretty interesting, just the myriad of responses that we got to that. Some people, all they wanted to do was they just wanted to teach. all they wanted to do was like, they didn't want to mess with the front desk stuff. They didn't want to mess with any of the sort of business behind the scenes stuff. They just wanted to show up. They just loved to teach. They loved the art. That was their passion, and that's what they wanted to focus on. Several people, believe it or not, didn't want to teach at all. They were kind of done with that, and through that phase, they wanted to get back to this time when it was possible for them to sort of travel, maybe take some classes and study under other people, and or many that teach sort of different art forms wanted to travel and sort of, they mentioned that they wanted to go visit the roots of those art forms and kind of learn more and study the history and that kind of stuff. Thought that was kind of cool that people had that sort of long-term goal and what successful meant to them. Many just frankly needed to be more financially successful. Many of you, you may be watching this, and you may be one of the people that we talked to as we were doing these interviews that just said, hey, look, I just have these commitments and I have my family. I want to contribute more financially to my family. And the long-term legacy of that. I have a lease payment or a mortgage payment that I have to cover every single month. I have staff members who I love and I'm passionate about helping, but I need to pay them more. Others just wanted to, kind of like I said before, they wanted this like sort of hobby that was fun, but they didn't want it to be expensive. They didn't want it to have to run this program at the expense of everything else going on in their lives. Some wanted to spend less time at the studio. Some didn't mind that time in the studio. Many of them, like I mentioned, looking for some kind of steady income for their instructors, so they wanted to be a reliable source of that for other people as well. The point that I'm making here is that a lot of people define what successful means differently, but all of these ideas of what success is have something in common. More students, and more specifically, higher cash flow, solve all of these problems. So as different as sort of everybody's definition of what running a successful studio is, the solution, or one of the solutions, is more students that are paying higher tuition rates at a higher level. Okay, so let's talk for a second, a moment here about why it's so hard to run a studio. Well, quite frankly, we're fighting an uphill battle, and as much as I love this industry and I love the businesses that I run, we are in an industry that is harder to maintain and manage than some others. In other words, there are other businesses that are easier to run than instructional art studios. Why is that? A couple of reasons. First of all, most of us that got into this business don't have some kind of a business or marketing or human resources background, or not one that's relevant to this particular industry and the niche that we're in. Also, and this is a big one, what's working is constantly changing. And the type of advertising that we need to be doing, frankly, the verbiage and the listings that we put up for hiring new staff, all of those kind of things are changing consistently over time, and trying to keep up with that stuff, man, it's just a part-time job. So no wonder it's difficult for so many people to do. Most areas are highly competitive, and that's more so today than it was 20 years ago. There were a lot of studios that didn't make it through COVID. There were a lot of studios that was kind of the excuse that they needed to finally sort of shut the doors. But believe it or not, coming out of COVID, there were more studios, at least in the United States, than there were going into COVID. And so most areas are now more competitive than they were in the past, and significantly more competitive than they were 10 years ago, and significantly more competitive than they were 10 years over that. We don't see that trend ending. We think that areas are going to become more competitive over time, not less competitive. Also, we need to be a little bit careful how I talk about this one, but the gender pool, we call the gender pool, is shrinking in our industry. And what I mean by that is, when I was a young whippersnapper, I was involved in the martial arts world, and I took a Taekwondo class. I remember when I was about 12 years old, and something like 95%, virtually everybody in my class was a boy, right? They were male. Today, you walk into any martial arts studio, and it's half girls and it's half boys. Soccer has gone through the same transition, right? There are just as many girls today playing soccer as there are boys involved in that. With dance, for the most part, outside of maybe hip hop and breakdance and some niche styles of dance like that, we haven't seen that same transition. So in other words, girls in particular are involved in many other sports that maybe they weren't so much involved in 20, 30 years ago. But today we're seeing a smaller sort of margin share in the dance world, if that makes sense, all right? Also, let's face it, people are just afraid. COVID did not help this, and the sort of desocialization of the world just has put people in this really weird place where they're just they always were afraid to go out and do things, especially if you're in the adult market. People are just absolutely terrified of putting themselves in a position where they feel out of control and aren't good and run the risk of being embarrassed. But they are afraid to come out and do stuff. And that's just another reason that's people aren't afraid necessarily generally to go grocery shopping. But they are afraid to participate in what it is that we're offering often the time. So we need to be honest about it, okay? Another big one that I hear all the time, moms don't want to spend money on themselves. I actually don't believe that that's the case, but that belief system gets in the way of, for example, running successful adult programs as well, okay? Our marketing, and this is the reason that I'm going over this, our marketing needs to consider these obstacles. We need to take them seriously and not just deny that they're not real things. They are real things. They are real things that impact our industry that don't impact some other industries. And if we want to grow our programs, we need to think about how we're going to systematize those solutions to those problems, okay? We need to do this without making some of the most common mistakes that studio owners make. Let's take just a brief moment to talk about what those mistakes are. Number one, believing that how good you are at what you teach should, that's the key word there, be the major indicator of how many students you have. If you have an awesome program and you're very, very good at what you do, you deserve to be very, very good at what you do and for your students to also become very good at what they do. But there is no law of the universe that says magically because you're good at what you do that you will magically be the most profitable studio or have the most students. I hope that makes sense. The opposite is also true. If you don't have a ton of students right now, that does not mean that your program isn't awesome. Those two things are not correlated, okay? Only to a certain degree. I mean, obviously, if you have a horrible program, let's not market the program because you're just going business faster. But I hope that this isn't lost on you. That this idea that the best indicator of how successful a studio is just how good the founders of the business are at what they do is it's a mistake. It's a fallacy, and we need to make sure that we're not kind of latching onto that or embarrassed about how. If my studio is not as successful as it could be, that must mean that I'm not as good at doing what I want. It's just not true, okay? Mistake number two that I see a lot in this industry is discounting classes in one way or another to get more people in the door. And a close correlation to this is trying to compensate for low enrollment in some other program by adding new programs. And then we end up with this octopus of a studio business where we have ballet, tap, jazz, fitness classes for adults, early morning boot camps, and acro classes. And we just have all of this stuff going on, and it just becomes that much more difficult to manage. And we're trying to compensate for low enrollment in our core program by adding additional programs, and or we're trying to lower the barrier of entry into our studio. Hey, come try out this super expensive thing or free classes, whatever that is, and discounting things just to get more people in the door. If what I'm saying is true, and it is, I promise, I have the numbers to show it, but if what I'm saying is true, that it's possible for all of us to be doing more with less, it is a mistake for us to be discounting things to get more people in the door, okay? Mistake number three, not effectively educating your markets on your value before you try to sell them something, okay? We need to make sure that before we try and convince somebody, hey, would you like to buy my stuff, right? Before we do that to people, we need to make sure that they're educated appropriately on the value proposition, on the value that we have that we can offer to them. And your competitors, I guarantee you, are making this mistake. I see this might be the biggest mistake of them all. They're putting online enrollment widgets on their website and thinking that if somebody just goes to their website and they can make an immediate offer to them and get them signed up in a class right at that point, that somehow that's going to magically mean that they never have to talk to anybody or something like that, that it's going to be so efficient that people are just going to magically enroll in their classes. But there's some massive mistakes in that way of thinking. And a big piece of it is that these people are not sufficiently educated on our value before we make them an offer. They're not sufficiently educated on our value, okay? So how do we fix all this? Let's get into it. Couple of steps. Step number one, there is no question, the most important thing that we can change is what we refer to in our coaching programs as the value-relevant pricing strategy. I'm not saying just go jack up your tuition rates on all of your current students. That's going to make some people upset. It's tough to put that genie back in the bottle. But if we can set up our pricing strategy at our studio the correct way, that is what has the fastest and most impactful influence on the profitability of our studio over time. Okay, this is by far the most overlooked issue by most studio owners. Quite frankly, because many of them are afraid of it. That's okay. Totally get that. And that once again, the strategy is not just go jack up your tuition rates on everybody. But let's think about this for a second. Almost everybody set their pricing by looking at what everybody else in the area was doing. And many of you may have looked at what other studios in the area were doing and then priced yourself slightly higher than everybody else in the area. And that's fine, that's okay. Usually not aggressive enough for us to make a massive difference. And one of the reasons for that is because all of those people that we looked at when we were deciding where to set our pricing did the same thing when they opened up shop as well. And so it's not possible that that is the most effective way of deciding what your product is worth. I don't want to run the Walmart of dance studios. I don't think Rolex walks into Walmart to check the pricing on their watches to determine what they're going to be selling their Rolex watches for, right? Studios often believe that by being competitive on price, they will compensate with enrollment. I will have more students if I lower my prices. And that's one of the most deadly things that a studio can do in the long term, not necessarily in the short term, in the long term. Big reason for that is what we call the money problem. I'm not going to get too far into it today, but basically the idea is that as your studio grows, as you get more students, it becomes more expensive to run. We need more real estate. We need more staff. Those are expensive things. We need more marketing out there to compensate for the attrition. Frankly, we have to pay to keep the lights on for longer in the facility and buy more paper towels for the bathrooms. Like, it just simply becomes more expensive to run. And so if we make that mistake by trying to be more competitive on price, it is the most deadly mistake we can make over the long term. Okay? When you fix this and you follow that value relevant pricing strategy, cash flow is no longer a problem. Imagine what that would be like. I can just pay these bills because the cash is just there in my account at any time. Students retain longer through the year, mostly because, for several reasons, but mostly because they have more skin in the game, and because your cash flow is no longer a problem, you can provide a superior product. That becomes very difficult to compete with. Students and parents are more dedicated, like I said, because they have more skin in the game. Summer programs are easier to navigate and make more profitable. The theme of your summer program is not the reason that it's not filling. Well, it might be the reason, but it's not the only reason that it's not filling. This is the reason. Okay, if we can solve this problem, it fixes the summer problem as well. Step number 2, so value relevant pricing strategy. Write that down if you don't have that down already in your notes. Step 2, focus on your higher level messaging. You don't just teach what it is you teach. Now, you probably are familiar with this idea already, but the value in what you teach is partially from what you teach. But there's a big piece of additional value that's perceived by the market in those secondary characteristics of what you teach. It's common for me to say, and my staff all are familiar with this idea, that I don't run dance studios. I run leadership training and character development facilities. We just happen to use dance as the delivery method for those things, okay? So if that's what you generally believe and you understand that piece, here's the next question I have for you then. Where do I go in your marketing to read about that real value? Is it on your website? Is it consistently in all of your ads that you put out there? The emails that you're firing off to your list? Are you talking about that higher level messaging, and are you focusing on that piece, or is it just kind of lip service? That's a question I think we all need to ask ourselves. I imagine I could be doing a better job of that in my own studios as well. People won't make this connection on their own. We need to explicitly spell that out for it. We need to make the implicit explicit as we are helping people to understand what our higher level messaging really is. What you really sell, no matter what you teach, what you really sell and what people are actually buying, and what people are willing to pay significantly higher tuition rates for, what people are willing to make large down payments instead of little $35 registrations fee for, is the transformation. And this is part of what we were talking about earlier. People need to understand and be able to clearly visualize that transformation. Listen to this next piece. Before you make them an offer, before you close them into your program, okay? What is it like when you fix this piece, the higher level messaging? Newer prospective students are simply willing to pay significantly higher tuition rates and larger down payments. I don't care what the economy is like where you live. It's not, hey, Mago, you don't understand where I am, it's different. No, if you can demonstrate more value, we will find ways to get prospective students to be more highly committed to what it is you're offering, okay? You also reposition your competitors. If you are that thing and you own that space in people's minds, it means that your competitors are not that thing, right? You stand out in the crowd as something special. People aren't just going to go to your studio because it's the closest to their house. Now they have a reason other than that, because that's what most of the criteria people are going to be using if you don't dial this in, they now have some other criteria with which to judge you to justify driving farther, paying more, committing for longer times, whatever that happens to be. Okay, we need to stand in our value as arts instructors. Look, what we all do has massive transformative power. We need to stop underestimating that. We're not trying to be mediocre. We're trying to shift everybody's success to the right side of that standard curve. Get out of the main piece of the bell curve. I want to be right-hand side of that. What you do has massive transformative power, and if we'll stand in our value, we'll help the entire community, the entire arts community, to shift in the right direction. Step number 3, this is kind of the marketing piece. We need to do what we call become 20-mile famous. The bigger, just the fact of the matter is, the bigger the pool of people that actually know what you offer, the more potential students you have. And if you live in a more rural area, quite frankly, we might need to make you more than 20-mile famous. We might need to go 30 miles out there. If you live in a very highly populated, dense, large city, 20 miles might be too far. We might need to narrow that down. And in many large cities, people simply aren't willing to drive that far to go try out something new. If they've already been sort of indoctrinated into your system, they will be. But those beginners, those front-end folks might not be. So keep in mind that when I say 20-mile famous, that varies a little bit depending on where your studio's situated. And if you'd like to chat with us about that sometime, I'm happy to hop on a call with you and talk you through what yours and your targeting should be. But the point is, we don't need to make you famous around the entire world, but we do need to make you well known, and we do need to educate the people in your area, in your marketable area, on the value of what you have. Okay? It's not just on your existence. It's not just I need to get my name out there. We need to increase the number of people that are actually educated on the value that you provide, that transformative power we were talking about. And then we can increase the size of the pond that we can fish in. You don't need to be world famous. You don't need a Kardashian level of followers on social media. If you do, that's fine. But quite frankly, it's usually not very helpful. The reason for that is that on social media, how many of the people that are following you when you post things, for example, on Instagram or whatever you're doing, are actually potential clients? How many of them live hundreds and hundreds of miles away? How many of them are already enrolled in your programs? How many of them are family members, parents and grandparents of the people that are enrolled in your programs and not really in the market for you to sell them anything, right? We don't need you world famous. We need you 20 mile famous, and by that we mean educated. And what happens when you fix this? You hear people say things like, I see you guys everywhere. This one here is one that came up with one of our clients. We showed them how to run a very simple video strategy on social media, a little paid strategy, very inexpensive paid strategy, cost about $2 a day. Yeah. And nobody knew what she was. Who she was, and nobody had any idea about this kind of crazy art form that she was teaching. And all of a sudden, she's walking through the grocery store, and people are coming up to her and saying, "Hey, aren't you this lady that teaches this thing?" And recognizing her, and it was just because of that strategy, that one strategy, as a matter of fact, that helped to make her 20-mile famous. People are more likely to interact with your marketing several times, making them more likely to sign up for an intro. This education piece is what's missing. Look, I know you guys see all those ads on social media just like I do. It's like, hey, we'll run your Facebook ads and we'll get you 1 billion students in 6 weeks, or whatever claims they're making now. But what's missing from a lot of those, and if you want to run the Walmarts of dance studios, go ahead and do it that way. I don't want to be that, okay? It's not what I'm trying to build. Is the education piece on the front end of this marketing, okay? Consistency breeds familiarity. If people consistently running into your stuff and seeing your stuff, they are familiar with you. Familiarity breeds trust, and people buy stuff. They're willing to pay more. They are willing to take larger risks and be more committed to people that they trust. That's education piece is what's missing from the beginning of most of those. And we'll dial that in and show you how that works in just a second here as well. Step number 4. Once we have this, sort of 20-mile famous thing going on, is we need to make sure that we have what we call a prospect pipeline. Some of you may have heard about this, talked about this before, but the prospect pipeline basically is kind of an indoctrination sequence. It's the piece of your marketing strategy that happens from between the time that somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I'm interested in your stuff, and the time when you say, here's what the program is, would you like to join, right? What happens between those two? And as I mentioned earlier, a huge mistake that your competitors are making that frankly we can exploit is that most of them are taking that gap and they're turning it into, it's a zero-sized gap, right? They're getting people to their website and then trying to directly enroll them. rather than having a period where they demonstrate value, very short period. But when somebody says, hey, I'm interested in your stuff, cool, what happens next? What are the discrete steps that happen next to make sure that those people don't fall through the cracks and we don't lose them, okay? Once again, those online enrollment pieces, there's some cool ways we can use those, but if we use them the wrong way, and most studios that use them are using them the wrong way, what happens is people hit your website, they see them, they don't enroll, they leave your website, and you don't know why, right? They're just now out there in the ether floating around, falling through the cracks, and there's no way for us to kind of like go back and get them, okay? And we don't get enough feedback about why they're not enrolling. What do they need to know before they come in for an intro class, okay? Or however you're doing that, open houses or studio tours or direct enrollments or whatever you're doing. What is it that we want them to know before any of that happens? And that's handled in the prospect pipeline. What objections can we overcome before we make them an offer, okay? And if you're not getting a lot of objections, you're probably not asking for enough commitment, and there's a good chance that you're not asking people to make enough of a transformation that you could be, okay? But what objections can we overcome before we make somebody an offer? This does not have to be complicated. Simple, 2, 3, 4 steps, something like that, but it should not be fully automated. Once again, I know I get the same ads that you get. There's all kinds of software products out there and people claiming that we can automate your emails and automate your text messages. That's fine in certain circumstances, but we want to make sure that we don't remove the human interactive element here. If we're going to be trying to do more with less, if we're going to be charging premium prices, we want to make sure that people are interacting with human beings and they get some human personal attention. Step number 5, I'm going to go through this one really quickly as I can here. Track the right stats to optimize. There are statistics that are helpful and there are statistics that are not helpful, that are disruptive if we pay too much attention to them. Building your studio is like building a house in a hurricane. There is always something we need to be doing. There is always something that is urgently yelling at us to get done. So we need to make sure that we work on the low-hanging fruit. What is the most profitable thing that I can do? And I mean that in terms of money and time and everything else, and your own personal sanity. What's the most profitable thing that I can be doing that's the easiest for me to reach? And then once I pick all of that lower-hanging fruit, I can go to the next level. But we want to make sure that if we're going to do this in the most efficient way possible, that we pay attention to the stats that help us to see what is the low-hanging fruit, okay? We need to watch the right numbers. I don't care how many people were enrolled in my adult tap class a year ago compared to how many are enrolled in it today. That's not a number that's helpful for me. That looking at that number and saying, oh, look, I doubled the number of people in that class, or it's only half as full as it used to be, doesn't tell me what to do. It doesn't tell me what to do next, okay? So I need to be paying attention to those numbers. Look, here's the truth. We can't do everything. So we need to focus on the most effective pieces. So what are those stats? Generally, those stats are stats that are at the transition points in your student life cycle, okay? The first piece we talked about already, that's the education piece. That's when somebody is just learning about your value and what it is that you actually provide. What is the transformation you actually provide? But then we want to make sure that those people that are kind of educated are getting some sort of an offer, that there's an advertisement dangling out there. That's the bait that we're throwing on our fishing hooks into the lake, right? But we want to make sure that we're throwing our bait into a lake of people that are already educated on what the value is that we offer. And that statistic, the number of educated people that see our advertising, that is an important statistic to know. The number of people who see our advertising that sign up for some kind of intro program. Now you can handle that lots of different ways, but that statistic is an important statistic to be tracking. The number of people that see our intro program and then come in to have some kind of an offer made eventually. They come in, they try out a class or whatever you're doing, come to an open house, and then there's some kind of an offer meeting made to them. We refer to that as the enrollment conference. Okay, lots of ways to handle that. But the percentage of people that come in for an intro that are actually enrolling, that number is important to watch. We know what that number should be, and believe it or not, it should not be 100%. You should not be enrolling 100% of the people who come in and take an intro into your programs. That is the clearest indication, this is important, that is the clearest indication we have that you have undervalued your program. Once they're enrolled in your program, that should not be the end. And I'm sort of disappointed to say that I see a lot of thought leaders in this industry kicking around the idea that, oh, if the students are really interested in your stuff, then you should offer them to take more classes. What a horrible system that is. Okay, it's really, really bad advice. But I want to be systematizing and tracking the statistic of the students that come in and enroll in my program and then move up to whatever my next level offering thing is. Okay, most studios, your competitors, don't have an effective system to be moving people into higher level and frankly more expensive programs in a systematic way. They're hoping that the person's interest and how good their classes are is what's moving, is what's making that transition, and it's nowhere near. Your competitors are nowhere near as efficient at that as they could be. And then of course there's a retention piece of the students that I enrolled this year. How many am I going to lose over the summer, right? Like I want to know that attrition rate. I want to know what that number is as well. And if I know those numbers and I know what they should be, I can figure out which ones are most out of whack and I can go fix those first. Does that make sense? Okay, those are the numbers I'm paying attention to, and that's how we can figure out what it is that's the low-hanging fruit in our studios. Don't allow vanity metrics to take your attention from where it needs to be. How many people liked your Facebook post? How many people opened your last email? I don't care. I've tried in the past to pay my lease with Facebook likes and email opens, and it doesn't work very well, okay? So don't allow yourself to be distracted by vanity metrics to take your attention away from where it needs to be in your business. A couple of questions for you. Will things just get better on their own? If you don't actively take an active role in changing the results that you're getting in your studio, will they get better on their own? That's not the way the universe generally works. We leave stuff alone for long enough or get distracted from it long enough. It does not improve itself over time. Are you willing to invest what you need to in order to see real progress? Let's talk for a second, frankly, about what the cost is to not fix what it's possible for you to fix in your studio. Quite frankly, for most of our clients, it's something like $100,000 in the next 6 months. That's the cost to not fix this. We have a number of clients, I shared some of their experiences with you at the beginning of the call, beginning of this presentation, that are doing significantly better than that. Continued frustration. If you're feeling some of that frustration that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, how much longer would you like to keep doing that? There is a cost. The point that I'm trying to make here, I'm not trying to be too overly dramatic, but there is a cost associated with not fixing these things. Being stuck or tied to the front desk or not able to attend the social situations that you want to put yourself back into, or not being able to spend time with family or travel or do the other things that you want. Quite frankly, what is this doing to your health? That's one of the things that first sort of triggered me, is that I recognized that I was a less healthy person until I fixed these, and I'm now just more balanced and healthy. Okay. Good news is, of course, there's a solution. You can stop wasting your time. You can stop waiting for things to get better on their own. You can stop feeling embarrassed that your studio isn't organized and profitable. You really can stop being broke or held prisoner or whatever it is to your studio. That transformation is absolutely possible. How can I help with this? A couple of ways, actually. But my team and I have some time set aside to speak with you personally, talk with you about this system and how we might be able to help you and your life and your business starting right now, starting today, if that's what you want to do. The cost of that, absolutely free. Who is this for? Well, you've got to be interested in aggressively investing in and growing your studio. We're not looking for people that are just trying to look for small changes that they can make. We're looking for massive changes. Massive results require massive implementation, okay? You must be committed to actually making those changes and growing and not just staying the same. If you can make that switch in your brain, I know it sounds a little bit silly, but if you can make that switch in your brain, we'd love to chat with you about that as well, what your goals are. It's for dance studio owners that question the traditional ways of doing things because that's how everybody else does it. Well, everybody else in my city does it this way, and so no, you don't need to do it that way. We can do things differently, and those different things get different results, okay? It's also for dance studio owners that are interested in attracting dedicated, quality students that place a high value on your service and are willing to pay well for it. We can show you how to set that up. Like I said, big thing for me is I don't want to be running the Walmart of dance studios. That's not what I aspire to be. I'm not aspiring to mediocrity. If that resonates with you, maybe we should chat just a little bit, okay? So why are we doing this and why are we doing it for free? On this call, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a super clear vision of what you can do to grow your studio. We're going to automate a lot of the work, like I said, not all of it, but we're going to automate a lot of the work so that you can also be increasing the profitability of that studio. Then, if you want us to help you and we think you're a good fit, we might invite you to work with us one-on-one. And we recognize that that's not a good fit for everybody. That's perfectly fine. That's okay. We're not in the arm twisting business, but we recognize also that some people will want our help. And that's why we're willing to do this for free, okay? You'll get the same training that all of our other studio owners we've talked about today have received. This training is specifically designed to help start making more money fast, attracting more students right away. You should plan on spending, here's the catch, spending 3 to 5 hours per week learning and implementing these systems. So there is stuff to learn and there is stuff to implement, but we'll be there to hold your hand and help you with it and answer whatever questions that you need. I'm going to push you to double your enrollment, double your student value, and add at least $1,000 in income to your studio. That should be the baseline standard for those of you that are interested in implementing these things. Okay, so how do you take advantage of that? Super easy. Head over to automateddancestudio.com. And like I said, we have some times set aside to chat with you about your studio and your goals. And here's what's going to happen. When you go to that link, it actually redirects you to a page that has a really simple form on it. We need a little bit of info. Of course, we're going to need your name and know what phone number to call you at, that kind of stuff. But we also need to know a little bit about your goals and your personal situation. We need to just know a little bit about, how long your studio's been in business and what you're trying to achieve and some stuff like that. Super simple form. Once you fill out those 5 or 6 questions, you hit the submit button. That'll get the info over to us, and then you'll be redirected to our calendar, and you'll be able to pick a time that works most conveniently for you, and then we'll be able to hop on a call, and we'll have a couple of questions for you about your studio and your current situation, and based on how you respond to those questions, what we'll be able to do is diagnose exactly, okay, this is what you need to do first. Like we said, what's the low-hanging fruit? We're very good at being able to figure that out. How can we make the most profit and make the biggest change as quickly as possible? And then we'll be able to outline that for you. And then if you're interested in having our help in implementing that, you can just say, hey, what would it look like if we work together? Or however you prefer to say that. And then we're happy to have that discussion if that's something that makes sense. Okay? So I'd recommend you head over to that website, head over to automateddancestudio.com, fill it out, give us a little bit of information. We would love to make you one of the new client case studies and testimonials and have you be the next one. And if you've got some room to add some new students and you've got some willingness to do things differently than most other studios are implementing things in their own programs, then this might be a good fit for you. Very, very little risk here. Like I said, we're not in the arm twisting business. We're in the let's work together if it makes sense business. And so head over to that page, automateddancestudio.com one more time. Fill out the little form, pick a time on the calendar when it would be most convenient for you for us to chat, and we'll help you come up with the vision of where the low-hanging fruit is, the simple 3 or 4 next steps that you should change at your studio. And if you're interested in having us help you to implement those, happy to have that discussion as well. Thanks for your attention today. Really excited to hear about your progress, to learn more about your studios and your goals. We'll talk to you soon.